Nothing says autumn like delicious, warm pumpkin bread. A blend of pumpkin and fabulous spices come together to make this delicious treat. But how do you make pumpkin bread? Let's find out. First, we need to gather our ingredients. We need one 15-ounce can of pumpkin puree. Puree basically means very squished up. We can look on the can to see that it contains 15 ounces of squished up pumpkin. The pumpkin will give our bread its delicious flavor. We also need 4 eggs. Eggs make our batter stable. They help hold everything together. We need 1 cup of vegetable oil. When I say 1 cup, I don't mean just any cup. A cup is a unit of measure. 1 cup is equal to 8 ounces. We can use our measuring cup to measure 1 cup of oil. I also need water, but a whole cup of water would be too much. Instead, the recipe calls for 2/3 of a cup of water. Notice how when I use my measuring cup to measure, the 2/3 of a cup of water is less than 1 cup of oil. Do you see the difference? We also need sugar, of course, to make it sweet. For this recipe, we need 3 cups of sugar. That's a whole lot of sugar. 3 cups of sugar is 3 times the amount of oil we need, as you can see. Next, we need to measure 3½ cups of flour. That means we need 3 full cups of flour and then 1/2 of another cup of flour. Flour helps hold the ingredients together, and it gives our bread a nice texture. We need 2 teaspoons of baking soda. A teaspoon is another unit of measure, but it is much smaller than a cup. See here the difference between a teaspoon of flour and a cup of flour. Baking soda helps our bread to rise so that it's large and fluffy instead of hard and flat. We also need 1½ teaspoons of salt, which means we need 1 teaspoon of salt and half of another teaspoon of salt. It's a good thing we aren't using 1½ cups of salt. That would make our bread really salty. Last, let's measure our spices: cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, and ginger. We need a teaspoon of cinnamon, a teaspoon of nutmeg, 1/2 of a teaspoon of cloves, and 1/4 of a teaspoon of ginger. If we look at these amounts from greatest to least, we see that we need less cloves than cinnamon and nutmeg. We only need 1/2 of a teaspoon of cloves, but the recipe calls for a whole teaspoon of cinnamon and a whole teaspoon of nutmeg. We need even less ginger than cloves because we only need 1/4 of a teaspoon of ginger. That's just a small part of a teaspoon. Looks like we're ready to make pumpkin bread. The first step is to preheat our oven. Think about the prefix pre. It means before. To preheat the oven means to heat it up before you try to bake anything in it. We do this to make sure it's just the right temperature for the bread to bake properly. We need to preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. 350 degrees Fahrenheit is pretty hot. Next, we need to mix together the pumpkin puree, eggs, oil, and water. Lots of people call these the wet ingredients because they are liquids. Then we'll add the sugar. How sweet! Let's mix together the dry ingredients next. I bet you can guess what they are. That's right, flour, baking soda, salt, and our spices: cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, and ginger. Now we need to combine our wet ingredients and dry ingredients. Once those are mixed together, we are ready to pour our batter into pans. Our oven is now 350 degrees and we're ready to bake. The recipe says we need 50 minutes. One way to test if our bread is ready is to see if we can stick a toothpick in the middle and not see any gloopy batter on it when we pull it out. It's a good thing we measured our ingredients carefully. If we had put in too much or too little of an ingredient, it may have made the cake very dry or bitter, or super sweet, or even soupy. Now enjoy your pumpkin bread with a cold glass of milk.